The Subcommittee on National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands will now come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on the 7 bills before us today. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chair and the ranking member. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they're submitted to the clerk by 5 p.m. today. Hearing no objection, so ordered. In addition, due to the broad interest in today's hearing, I would like to ask unanimous consent that all interested members be allowed to join us and participate on the dais. Thank you all for attending today's Subcommittee on National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands legislative hearing to consider 7 public lands bills. I would like to extend my gratitude to the bill sponsors who are joining us today to testify and to the witnesses, many of whom have traveled a long way to speak about the national significance of landmarks and memorials throughout our great country. The proposals before us today aim to commemorate some very significant events and periods of time in our nation's history, including 3 bills to authorize memorials here in the nation's capital. The first of those is H.R. 5068, introduced by Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, which would authorize the establishment of the Women Who Worked on the Home Front commemorative work in order to share the stories of women who kept America running during World War II. With many men deployed for the war, these women worked on farms and in defense plants, fixed cars, flew military aircraft, and served at home and abroad in uniform to support our troops. The idea for this memorial was developed after a 5th grader from Washington, D.C. was inspired by a movie, A League of Their Own. This young student developed a conceptual design to honor the hundreds of thousands of women across the country who filled historically male jobs during World War II. Representative Napolitano's bill would authorize a memorial to honor the reporters, photojournalists, producers, editors, and others who have lost their lives while performing their jobs. In 2018 alone, nearly 80 journalists from around the world were murdered, and this memorial stands to be a fitting tribute to our nation's commitment to a free press. Representative Doggett's Republic of Texas Legation Memorial Act seeks to commemorate the work of diplomats from the Republic of Texas who were sent out shortly after it gained independence. Among other things, these diplomats advocated for protection from Mexico, financial assistance, and ultimately annexation by the United States. London and Paris both have honorary plaques to memorialize this historic delegation, and it seems only fitting to install one in Washington, D.C., the capital of the country, proud to claim Texas as its own. We're also reviewing 2 bills to recognize memorials outside of Washington, D.C., including Representative Soto's bill, which would recognize the Pulse Memorial in Orlando, Florida, as the National Pulse Memorial. On June 12, 2016, 49 innocent lives were lost and 68 others were wounded when a gunman who pledged allegiance to ISIS opened fire at Pulse, a gay nightclub in Orlando, Florida, in what President Obama called an act of terror and an act of hate. This was the deadliest attack on the LGBTQ community to date, and national recognition is certainly warranted. We will also consider Representative Norcross's proposal to designate the Peter J. McGuire Memorial National Historic Landmark in New Jersey. McGuire was a leader in the unification of the workforce. He formed the United Brotherhood of Carpenters and established the Federation of Organized Trades and Labor Unions, which later became the American Federation of Labor. McGuire was also responsible for enforcing the 8-hour workday and instituted the first Labor Day, which Congress officially recognized as a national holiday in 1894. Finally, we'll consider Representative Curtis's bill to rename a mountain in his district and Representative Stubbs' proposal to waive special use permit application fees for veterans, demonstrations, or special events at national war memorials. The National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands Subcommittee is charged with recognizing and commemorating the people and events that have shaped our nation. Today's hearing is a good representation of these people and events. I would like to thank the sponsoring members and witnesses again for being here today. I look forward to hearing your testimonies. I now recognize Ranking Member Curtis for his opening statement.
Thank you. I want to thank Chair Holland for convening this hearing today. We have before us 7 bills commemorating individuals groups, and events that have shaped our nation's history, recognizing both our nation's past tragedies and triumphs. This includes remembering and honoring the victims of the tragic Pulse nightclub shooting, commemorating the founder of Labor Day, honoring journalists who were killed in line of duty, recognizing the millions of women that worked on the home front during World War II to help their fellow heroes win the war, memorializing the Texas litigation, and making it easier for veterans to hold special events and demonstrations at our nation's memorials. I'm especially pleased to see the inclusion of one of my bills, H.R. 722, the Miracle Mountain Designation Act. My bill would designate a mountain near Elk Ridge City, Utah as Miracle Mountain. In early September of 2018, the Pole Creek and Bald Mountain fires burned roughly 20,000 acres in Utah. Elk Ridge City and Woodland Hills, located in Utah County, were nearly victims of this fire. Miraculously, due to a change in wind direction on September 13th, the fire suddenly halted, stayed behind a mountain peak, and spared the community. Since the fire, the unnamed peak has been referred to as Miracle Mountain by many of my constituents. Although last year's fire season was one of the worst, it brought out the best of Utah and our communities. I'm pleased to have Elk Ridge City Mayor Ty Ellis here with us this morning, recognizing that he has witnessed a miracle. Shortly after the fire was contained, Mayor Ellis reached out to me to see if we could have the peak named Miracle Mountain. I'm grateful to Mayor Ellis, as well as all of the courageous federal, state, and local firefighters that worked tirelessly to battle the blaze. Naming the peak Miracle Mountain is a fitting gesture of gratitude. I want to thank all of the witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to hearing their testimony. Thank you, and I yield the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ranking Member Curtis. Now I would like to turn to our first panel and welcome the members of Congress who wish to testify on the bills they have sponsored. Under our committee rules, oral statements are limited to 5 minutes, but you may submit a longer statement for the record if you choose. The lights in front of you will turn yellow when you have 1 minute left and red when time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Soto.
First of all, thank you, Chair Holland and Ranking Member Curtis, for having this hearing today. Chairwoman, as you had mentioned, our community woke up on June 12, 2016, absolutely traumatized to find out that our little happy town of Orlando, where so many folks come from around the nation to enjoy our major theme parks, that we suffered one of the deadliest shootings in U.S. history. It was Latin night, and so 90% of the victims were from the Latinx community. And of course, it profoundly affected the LGBT community because of the nature of the Pulse nightclub. After this tragedy, though, our city came together. Countless works of art, gifts, letters were left impromptu at the memorial site, paying tribute to Pulse victims and survivors. So many different artifacts and recognitions came from states across our nation and across the world that we have collected over 5,000 artifacts. And so it has truly become a national memorial, a national shrine for people to pay their respects to those who we lost. The exhibit that currently is at the Orange County History Center that will be eventually moved to the National Memorial as another year passes Orlando after the Pulse nightclub massacre. The physical exhibit opened in June of 2018 through October 2018. The One Orlando Collection Initiative, as I mentioned, has over 5,000 photos and memorial items. After that, the Pulse nightclub owner, Barbara Poma, established the One Pulse Foundation. H.R. 3094 would establish the site of the Pulse nightclub as a non-affiliated National Park Service memorial, which would not require federal funds. The designation as a national memorial honors the lives taken, the survivors, the first responders, and the entire Central Florida community. And the memorial will serve as a reminder of the remarkable way we came together both as a community and as a nation to overcome hate and terrorism. Americans from across the nation continue to visit this site, making it truly a national point of interest. We recognize the need to preserve LGBTQ historic sites because of cases like the Matthew Shepard Memorial and others that, without protections, have been eliminated over time. Upon passage, this legislation would signify congressional recognition of this site as one of national importance. We must preserve these landmarks for future generations, and we must never forget. So I'll end where I began. Thank you, Chair Holland, for having this hearing, and thank you, Ranking Member Curtis, for your kind words and your opening remarks, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Soto. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Napolitano.
Good morning, and I thank you, Chairwoman Holland and Ranking Member Curtis, the subcommittee, for holding this hearing. And I am very honored to speak today on H.R. 3465, the Fallen Journalist Memorial Act of 2019, which I introduced along with my Republican colleague, Representative Tom Cole. And I want to thank him for partnering with me on this critical legislation. And I am grateful that our bill has bipartisan, bicameral support. Journalists put their lives on the line every day to protect our democracy as well as a free and independent press. And worldwide, over 1,300 journalists since 1992 have wrongfully died while working towards these objectives. This includes journalists who have died while working, covering military conflicts and wars, journalists who were wrongfully murdered, and journalists who died from ruthless acts of terror. One of the most recent and horrifying events was the Capitol Gazette shooting in Annapolis, Maryland, on June 28, 2018, which during this tragic event, the gunman shot and killed 5 employees and injured 2 more. The only memorial that currently exists to honor the sacrifices of these men and women is at the museum in Washington, D.C., which is closing this month, in January. With this closure, there will be no place that commemorates those who gave their lives in the field of journalism. The Fallen Journalist Memorial will be a visible symbol and reminder of the essential value they play in our free democracy. The bipartisan bill would authorize the Fallen Journalist Memorial Foundation to establish a commemorative work in Washington, D.C., honoring journalists, photographers, broadcasters killed in the line of duty. The foundation will plan the design, construction, operation, and maintenance of the memorial in the National Park Service. 3465 explicitly prohibits the use of taxpayer funds to design or construct the memorial and stipulates that the memorial must be designed and built in compliance with existing federal standards for commemorative works. Located all over the nation's capital are federal monuments dedicated to Americans who have sacrificed their lives while promoting the values of our democracy, and it is long overdue that a similar permanent commemorative work to honor the journalists who put their lives on the line at home and abroad to bring us the truth and defend our First Amendment rights. I urge the committee to support H.R. 3465 and invite all members, especially my Republican colleagues, to pay tribute to those who perished not only in the front lines of battle, but those whose lives have been lost while fulfilling their duty to deliver the news for us. And I thank you, committee, and I yield back my time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Napolitano. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I appreciate your holding this hearing, especially on my bill, on the women who worked on the home front World War II Memorial Act. I'll simply summarize my testimony. It's a wonder we hadn't done this before. It is a bill to memorialize 18 million American women who during World War II assisted either directly in the war effort here at home or actually behind the lines in the field. Later in this hearing, you will hear testimony from my 17-year-old constituent, Raya Kinney, the founder of the nonprofit Women Who Worked on the Home Front Foundation. I am here really supporting her effort, which has noticed for the first time that women were instrumental in maintaining the stability of the economy during World War II and have not received nearly the kind of credit that men who bravely fought during that war have received. So my bill would establish a memorial to these women, and it's going to be an interactive memorial. It notes that during the 5 years, peak years of the war, the women in the workforce went from 27% to 37%. The work done by women included 25% of married women. They had a profound effect on the job market that we continue to see today. The women who work behind, some of these women who work behind the scenes did classified work, so they have been even less noted. They flew military aircraft, so pilots could leave for combat overseas. They flew nearly every type of military aircraft. I think we've all heard of the WASP, the Women Air Force Service pilots. They flew planes from factories to bases, and yet these women have not been given, they were not given full military status until 1977, and it was not until 1910 that they were recognized with the Congressional Gold Medal. These women have been largely ignored from the memorials on federal land in my district, of course, the nation's capital. I very much appreciate the committee pressing this bill to a hearing today and strongly urge you and my colleagues to support this legislation. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. So, thank you. Okay, thank you all so much for being here. We will, I now invite panel 2 to take their places at the witness table. Thank you for your valuable testimony. As with the first panel, oral statements are limited to 5 minutes, but your entire statement will be part of the hearing record. The lights in front of you will turn yellow when there is 1 minute left and red when time has expired. After the witnesses have testified, members will be given the opportunity to ask questions. The chair now recognizes Mr. David Vela, Deputy Director of the National Park Service. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Vela.
Thank you, Chairwoman Hall and Ranking Member Curtis and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to present the Department of the Interior's views on 6 of the bills on today's agenda. I'd like to submit our full statements for the record and summarize the department's views. H.R. 1702 would waive the application fee for any special use permit for veterans demonstrations and special events at war memorials on federal land. The department welcomes opportunities to commemorate and honor the brave men and women in uniform and their families who have sacrificed so much in service to our country. The National Park Service does not require application fees for special use permits currently for veterans events at memorials, as it appears that the purpose of H.R. 1702 is to codify this practice. The department supports the goal of the bill. In addition, we'd like to work with the sponsor and the committee to clarify the legislation. Specifically, we would like the bill to be clear about whether it applies only to National Park Service memorials in the National Capital Area, or also to other agencies that manage war memorials on federal land and other places, and whether it is intended to apply only to memorials that commemorate veterans or to a broader range of memorials. H.R. 2317 would designate the Peter J. McGuire Memorial and gravesite located in Pennsauken, New Jersey, as a National Historic Landmark. The department recognizes the important contributions of Peter J. McGuire to the labor movement and American history. However, the department does not support the designation of a National Historic Landmark through legislation. We believe the most appropriate way to pursue that status is through the well-established administrative process. H.R. 3094 would designate the National Pulse Memorial at the site of the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, where 49 people were killed and 50 others wounded in a mass shooting. The department does not have a position on H.R. 3094, as the memorial would be located at a site that is not under the jurisdiction of the Department of the Interior, and this bill does not provide for any management or funding by the National Park Service. We would, however, ask the subcommittee to consider the designation as national may create confusion and an expectation that the memorial has an affiliation with the federal government. The final three bills, H.R. 3349, 3465, and 5068, would authorize the establishment of commemorative works in the District of Columbia and its environs. H.R. 3465 would authorize the Fallen Journalists Memorial Foundation to establish a memorial honoring journalists who have sacrificed their lives in service to a free press. The bill was reviewed by the National Capital Memorial Advisory Commission, which made recommendations to this committee regarding the proposal. The department would support H.R. 3465 if amended to clarify the purpose and focus of the commemorative work. H.R. 3349 would authorize the Daughters of the Republic of Texas to establish a memorial to the Texas Legation, which represented the independent Republic of Texas in Washington, D.C. from 1836 to 1845 as they pursued the annexation of the Republic of Texas to the United States. H.R. 5068 would authorize the women who worked on the Homefront Foundation to establish a memorial to the millions of women who worked to support the war effort during World War II. The department recognizes the contribution to the shaping of our nation's history represented by the subjects of both of these bills, but we recommend that the committee defer action on both of them until the National Capital Memorial Advisory Commission has had an opportunity to review the proposals. Ideas for new memorials benefit greatly from their review that they receive through the commission. Chairwoman Holland, this concludes my statement, and I would be pleased to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Vella. The chair now recognizes Ms. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Welcome, Mr. Doggett. Anywhere you'd like.
Long ago, I served on this committee, and it's good to be back, and I thank the ranking member and the chair for the opportunity to come and testify on behalf of the Republic of Texas Legation Act. It was back in 1845 that Texas became the 28th state to join the Union. At that time, the United States got its largest state in the continental United States, and eventually significantly better barbecue. The district that I represent includes the historic Alamo in San Antonio. With the battle cries of Remember the Alamo and Remember Goliad, Texas eventually won its independence on March 2nd, 1836. But for almost a decade after that, Texas was an independent nation, and you're well aware of the fact that the independent spirit of the state continues. I live in East Austin, And only a few blocks from my house, the historic French legation reminds us of a time when the nation of France maintained formal diplomatic relations with the nation of the Republic of Texas. Texans, in turn, established legations in Paris, London, some other European countries, and most importantly, the Texas delegation was sent on the very long and difficult journey from Texas to here in Washington, D.C. From 1836 to 1845, the Texas legation negotiated the terms by which Texas would join the United States. Mindful particularly, Madam Chair, of your home area, because at that time, as you know, the territory of the Republic of Texas extended all the way to Wyoming. It included all of the present state of Texas, parts of Oklahoma, Kansas, Colorado, and Wyoming, as well as the area around the city of Albuquerque in New Mexico. At the time, the state had many debts, many challenges from abroad, and so it took a long time to work out all the details. The members of the Texas legation operated out of a number of boarding houses just down the street near the present-day National Archives and the Navy Memorial, which is appropriate since one of the diplomats included during that time was Mr. Hunt, who was also the Secretary of the fledgling Republic of Texas Navy. Today, we find plaques, as I believe you noted in your opening remarks, Madam Chair, about the Texas legation in London and in Paris, but there's not yet one here in Washington. And that's what the H.R. 3349 that I've introduced, a bipartisan bill, the Republic of Texas Legation Memorial Act, would address. It would assure a commemoration here in our nation's capital. It authorizes the Daughters of the Republic of Texas to create a commemorative work to honor the representatives of the Republic of Texas who served here in the district as diplomats to the United States. This bipartisan effort is supported not only by a number of my Texas colleagues, but by Congresswoman Holmes Norton, in whose area the plaque would reside. Once this bill passes, Congress, the Daughters of the Republic of Texas, which is our state's oldest patriotic women's organization, would be committed to the preservation of Texas heritage. They are committed and have done so much to preserve sites in Texas. They would serve as stewards of this work and would work together with the National Parks Service. I want to particularly acknowledge, and I believe she's here today, Kitty Hoyk, who's the historian of the Elizabeth Ney chapter, representing the district, Virginia and Maryland, for the Daughters of the Republic. And I have her statement to submit for the record, as well as the statement of the President General of the Daughters of the Republic, to ask you to include in the record. The history of the legation didn't end when Texas became part of the Union, and today the history of the legation lives on in what I think is a stronger state now with a multicultural, multilingual community. We look back to that history, certainly, but we also look forward and seize the pen to write new histories that will be even better and more inclusive to reflect our founding values. I respectfully request that the committee approve the bill since Texas history is such an important part of the history of our country. And I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Doggett. Thank you very much. The chair now recognizes Ms. Norton for 30 seconds to introduce her witness, Ms. Raya Kinney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is a very great pleasure to introduce a witness, a 17-year-old high school senior who grew up in Washington, D.C. When is the last time you've seen a teenager come before this committee? But it was her idea. She's had three passions, a passion for history, for her own hometown, and for women who paved the way for the opportunities that we enjoy today and in her own life. So I'm sure the committee would want to hear from Raya and the bill. She inspired the women who worked on the home front World War II Memorial Act. Thank you for inviting her to testify.
Chair Howland, Representative Curtis, and the distinguished members of the committee. Thank you so much for inviting me to testify before the National Parks, Forest, and Public Lands Subcommittee today. It is an honor and a privilege to be here. My name is Raya Kenny, and I am the founder of the National Memorial to the Women Who Worked on the Homefront Foundation. Our goal is to get a monument built to the women who worked on the homefront during World War II. A big thank you goes to Representative Eleanor Holmes Norton and her staff, who have worked tirelessly to get this project to where it is today, and to Chair Halland, who is an original co-sponsor of this important piece of legislation. This project started 7 years ago when I was in 5th grade. I was assigned a project for school to build a model monument to someone or something that hadn't been recognized in Washington, D.C. Having just watched A League of Their Own, which is a film about the women baseball players of World War II, I had a newly found passion about the women who worked on the home front, filling in the jobs the men off fighting could no longer occupy. As I delved into my research, I learned there were over 18 million civilian women who worked on the home front. Typically, when people envision these women, they see the "We Can Do It" poster with Rosie the Riveter proudly flexing her arm. However, the women who worked were far more than just factory workers. They were code breakers, pilots, lumberjacks, taxi drivers, engineers, mail carriers, among many other jobs. And I was surprised to learn that no monument existed to commemorate their dedication and contributions to the war effort. Therefore, I chose to build my model monument to them. I sent out letters and emails to garner support for the idea, and I've received a lot of help along the way. The first big step occurred in 2016 when the Belmont Paul Women's Equality National Monument invited me to the National Park Service 100th anniversary celebration to display my model monument. Everyone in attendance was incredibly supportive, and administrators for the National Park Service told me that my design is what they look for in a memorial, and they encouraged me to keep trying to get it built and suggested I reach out to my representative, Eleanor Holmes Norton, who was incredibly supportive and agreed to draft and introduce the legislation for this bill. As stipulated by the National Capital Planning Commission's steps for establishing a memorial in the nation's capital, all funding for this project would be privately raised through the foundation using crowdsourcing and corporate donations, and we would look to garner support from women's groups and companies that first employed women during the war. The proposed memorial design is shaped like a V to symbolize victory, which was a common formation during World War II at baseball games and school assemblies. 20 pillars form the V shape, and the pillars represent the women themselves, signifying their roles as the pillars of strength that kept our country going. The pillars would be constructed of granite with the names of the jobs women held etched on each side. And I would be excited about working with historians in the Library of Congress to make sure that we include every job that a woman held during the war, as to not exclude any group or individual. The monument is designed in a way as to not interfere with any other monuments, and would be an interactive experience where people can sit and reflect on the women's important contributions. And I'm happy to take suggestions from professionals and look forward to hearing their ideas on the design. Being able to meet with women who have worked on the home front has been incredibly eye-opening as well. For example, Phyllis Gould, she's a 97-year-old Rosie who worked as a welder at Kaiser Shipyards, corresponds with me through letters and phone calls, and has said when discussing recognition of her barrier-breaking role, "I want it to be something permanent because these women worked and they did every job that was vacated by a guy going into the service." End quote. All the women who would be honored under this memorial were civilians, and even the ones who worked for the military were not included under the GI Bill. This is not a quick or easy process, but it's an important one. I love watching the World War II vets come to my hometown of Washington, D.C. on their tour buses to view their memorial. People often stop and clap for them, and they are so proud. The women who worked on the home front were so instrumental in the war effort, and they too deserve recognition. Thank you for supporting this ongoing work and for giving me the opportunity to testify before you today. A big thank you goes to Covington and Burling for their pro bono legal assistance and advocacy support, and to the Davis Brody Bond for their pro bono assistance in rendering my design and offering guidance. And a thank you again to Representative Norton and to all the co-sponsors of the original bill. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, and I respectfully request that you'll consider authorizing this memorial for these incredible women. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kinney. The chair now recognizes Ms. Napolitano for 30 seconds to introduce her witness, Ms. Barbara Cochran.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Cochran is former Washington News executive and retired as professor at University of Missouri School of Journalism. Was at the NPR, National Public Radio, moving to radio and television, executive producer of NBC's Meet the Press, vice president and Washington bureau chief of CBS News, the first woman to head a network bureau in Washington, and served as Radio, Television, Digital News Association for 12 years. In the last 9, she's been at Missouri School of Journalism and is currently president of the National Press Club and president of the Fallen Journalists Memorial Foundation, and I welcome her. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cochran. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair Holland, and also Representative Curtis and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to testify in support of H.R. 3465, the Fallen Journalists Memorial Act. As you heard, my name is Barbara Cochran, and I serve in a voluntary capacity as the president of the Fallen Journalists Memorial Foundation. I've spent my entire adult life working in journalism or on behalf of journalists, and so it's a great privilege to be able to tell you why this project is so needed. I particularly want to express the journalism community's appreciation to Representatives Grace Napolitano and Tom Cole for introducing the legislation, as well as to Natural Resources Committee Chairman Raul Grijalva and so many other members of the committee for co-sponsoring this measure. The genesis of the Fallen Journalists Memorial Act stems from a long-time bipartisan working and personal relationship between Representative Napolitano and her former California colleague, Representative David Dreyer, who is currently the chairman of the board of Tribune Publishing. Like all Americans, they were appalled when on June 28, 2018, a gunman shot and killed 5 employees and wounded 2 others at the office of the Capital Gazette, the local newspaper in Annapolis, Maryland. It was the deadliest attack against journalists in U.S. history. It took place just 18 months ago. Representative Napolitano and former Representative Dreyer collaborated once again, this time on the idea of a national memorial that would demonstrate to our citizens and to visitors from around the world that our country values a free press, honors the sacrifices of journalists, and supports the family, friends, and colleagues of the fallen. It's an all too frequent but unfortunate reality that reporters and photojournalists must often run toward danger when seeking the truth. That's why so many have died while covering war and conflict, from Ernie Pyle in World War II to Francois Sully, Larry Burroughs, and Dana Stone in the Vietnam War, and David Bloom, Michael Kelly, Elizabeth Neufer, and Daniel Pearl in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. Washington has many monuments to those who've sacrificed their lives to protect our freedoms, and yet there is no memorial on public land to the journalists who have made the same sacrifice to protect these same freedoms. This is particularly important given the pending closing of the museum and with it, the Journalist Memorial, the 2-story glass monument that commemorates reporters, editors, photographers, and broadcasters who've lost their lives reporting the news. The Fallen Journalists Memorial Act would authorize our foundation to design and build a memorial in accordance with the Commemorative Works Act and with the input and approval of all regulatory bodies. Our foundation has the capacity, expertise, and resources to ensure the memorial is designed, constructed, and maintained in accordance with the Commemorative Works Act and without the use of any taxpayer funds. Let me repeat. If we are authorized to do so by Congress, our foundation fully intends to raise and use only private funds to build and maintain the memorial in perpetuity without the use of any taxpayer dollars going into that effort. Our foundation operates under the auspices of the National Press Club Journalism Institute, which is the nonprofit affiliate of the National Press Club. We have a broad range of distinguished journalists who serve on our board of advisors. We're collaborating with leading organizations that represent newspapers, broadcast and digital media, and photojournalism, and also with organizations that advocate for journalists in danger. This includes the Committee to Protect Journalists as well as News Media Alliance, which represents nearly 2,000 diverse news organizations in the U.S. We also have the initial financial support of two prominent nonprofit organizations, the Annenberg Foundation and the Michael and Jackie Farrow Foundation. We are very grateful for your consideration of this worthy project, which will be a source of education, awareness, and pride for our entire nation. I'm happy to answer any questions and provide any additional information you may need. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cochran. The chair now recognizes Mr. Robert Fisher Hughes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you, Representative Curtis. I speak on behalf of Peter J. McGuire and his memorial in Pennsauken. Peter McGuire was known to friends as P.J. McGuire, and he has been called by historians a forgotten giant. I think this is very appropriate. His great achievements in a life of only 53 years are astonishing and inspiring, particularly as P.J. McGuire entered work at the age of 10, leaving school to support his family. He became a carpenter and developed a concern for working people that guided his life and career through constant struggle, aided most of the time primarily by his own intellect, eloquence, amazing personal energy, and a single-minded determination. This career and mission to agitate, educate, and organize to better the lives of working people in America came at a great personal cost to Mr. McGuire. But his accomplishments today are taken for granted only because he was willing to pay those personal costs. Peter J. McGuire's genius for organizing first appeared during a time of depression and widespread unemployment. His early efforts ended tragically in failure, but he did not yield and he did not quit, but found other means of carrying on. In 1881 in St. Louis, Missouri, working as a carpenter and organizing carpenters, P.J. McGuire rose to leadership and called for the formation of a national carpenters union. The Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners of America was formed later in that year at a convention in Chicago in answer to his call. McGuire was elected the first general secretary of the organization and was its only full-time staff for its first 15 years of existence. Under his leadership, the Brotherhood grew into one of the largest and most powerful unions in American history. In his position, McGuire united disparate carpenters' unions across the country, negotiated settlements of strikes and labor actions, conciliated disputes among organizations, facilitated improved standards for the carpentry trade, went on speaking tours in dozens of cities at a time, drawing crowds of hundreds and thousands, and inspired increased solidarity, all the while operating the executive offices of the Brotherhood and carrying on an extensive correspondence and publishing the organ of the union, the Carpenter. P.J. McGuire also played a key role in the formation of the Federation of Organized Trades and Labor Unions as a founding officer and in its subsequent reinvention as the American Federation of Labor, along with his friend and colleague Samuel Gompers. P.J. McGuire was an early champion of the 8-hour-a-day movement from his very earliest involvement in the labor movement itself. He made the adoption of the 8-hour-day standard a principal objective of the Brotherhood and subsequently of the Federation. He led, as the leader of the Carpenters Union, both the moves for the general strike of 1886 and that of 1890 in support of the 8-hour day and secured the benefits of that 8-hour day for hundreds, if not thousands, across the country. Peter McGuire's most famous achievement was his role in the creation of a new holiday to honor working people, Labor Day. McGuire called for setting aside a day to celebrate the working people at a leadership meeting at the Central Labor Union in 1882. The first official observance of Labor Day occurred later that year in Union Square in New York. He was among the speakers, and he subsequently lobbied for the adoption of Labor Day in the Carpenter for years until it was finally adopted by President Cleveland and Congress in 1894. McGuire's own career in the labor movement ended in 1902 as his health failed and as a new generation of leadership with very different ideas pushed its way into leadership amid charges of irregularity. He died in 1906 and was eventually interred in Arlington Park in Pennsauken Township outside of Camden, where he had lived the last years of his life. However, labor was not done with Peter McGuire. For 113 years since his interment at Arlington, the labor movement has every single year at Labor Day held ceremonies at Arlington Cemetery. These ceremonies have also been including mayors, governors, congressmen, senators, candidates for office, secretaries of labor, clergy, the public in general, and many members of unions. Peter McGuire's contributions in this regard have been transformative of the nation, and his importance basically it dictates that he should not be a forgotten giant any longer, and that we need to commemorate his importance in our history. Thank you.
Very much, Mr. Fisher-Hughes. The chair now recognizes Mr. Curtis for 30 seconds to introduce his witness, the Honorable Ty Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm so pleased today to introduce Mayor Ellis. Having served as a mayor in a neighboring city, I have a great appreciation for his position as mayor, for the work that he does, and for this amazing community that he represents and those who surround him. So, Mayor Ellis, thank you for traveling with your wife to be with us today, and we look forward to your testimony.
Mr. Ellis, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Chairwoman. Appreciate the opportunity to be here, and Ranking Member Curtis. It truly is an honor. Elk Ridge is a small city located about an hour south of Salt Lake City. We are bordered by a few other small communities, some beautiful orchards that we cherish, and also the Forest Service land. We share this common border with the Forest Service, and because of that, we are certainly aware and have a heightened concern for wildfire. During the summer, it's common for us to have south winds that blow hot and dry. And at these times, we all are very concerned about the dangers that forest fires would bring to our city. And history shows that the impact of forest fires into communities like Elk Ridge is serious and can be devastating. Just look at the Camp Fire in California, which was California's deadliest and most destructive fire ever recorded. The facts that lead up to this and all the facts of the devastation just can't do justice to the devastating impact on these communities, the families, and the individuals that are affected. On Friday, August 24th of 2018, lightning sparked the Bald Mountain Fire. Later, it would become a very significant event for Elk Ridge City. On September 13th, a prolonged period of red flag warnings were to be issued. With the help of these southerly winds blowing at 35 miles an hour and greater, that little fire transformed into a major wildfire. In less than 16 hours, it grew from pretty much nothing to about 6,000 acres. And more importantly, it started at 9.5 miles away from our city, and within that 16-hour period, it advanced to 4.5 miles away from our city. And of course, this rapid advancement led to us issuing mandatory evacuation for the cities of Elk Ridge and Woodland Hills. With the city being evacuated, this eerie quiet settled in with the smoke. And that evening, we watched that fire progress from 4.5 miles away to 2.5 miles away. And I remember sitting in those just beneath our big city flag outside, with that flag standing straight out in those winds, and we were wondering to ourselves, how long would it take? How long is it going to take before it hits our city? Experienced wildland firefighters that night commented that by the time morning hit, our city would be horribly devastated before morning. And we all resigned to the fact that there were going to be homes lost in our city. Fortunately, because of the evacuation, we did not too concerned about the loss of life. During those late hours of September 13th and the beginning of the next day, we observed a dramatic change in how that fire progressed. It stopped its advancement north and went east instead, behind the mountain that is the subject of this bill today, or this resolution today. And it defied all reason, and the firefighters were amazed at how that fire changed direction in its progression. With daylight coming upon us, I decided to take a tour through the city to see if I could see any spot fires or the like. And as I drove towards that mountain, I said to myself, it truly is a miracle that that mountain remains green, and behind it is nothing but ash. As it turns out, that was not the only unexplainable event in this fire. Yes, it changed course. In the canyon that did come into our city, there was a woodshed there, and it burned to the ground. That was the only structure that fire destroyed. And that woodshed sits underneath a pine tree, which was scorched, and next to a home which was never even damaged in any way. There were many amazing events that occurred during this time, one of which was the great support from our communities. The Red Cross was on scene. Fortunately, with all the homes that were evacuated and all the families displaced, the Red Cross did not need to service any homes or in any way. They actually packed up and left because our community took us all in, and we were very grateful for that. And as mayor, I testified that the Bald Mountain Fire had a potential to devastate our little cities. Madam Chair, I've laid out before you this brief summary, and I cannot explain why Elkridge was spared, but I can tell you that we all feel that it would be a miracle. It would be a terrible tragedy to simply let all this fade away with the passage of time without have some permanent reminder that these events recognized by so many people as miraculous. Is therefore my hope that this subcommittee will find it favorable to give the mountain that we've named Miracle Mountain its proper name for generations to come. And I appreciate the opportunity once again to be here and to testify before you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ellis. Thank you all for that valuable testimony. The chair will now recognize members for questions, and under Committee Rule 3D, each member will be recognized for 5 minutes. And I will first recognize Mr. Tonko for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Hallen, and to our colleague as ranker and the committee. And thank you for our panelists for some very interesting concepts. Many of the bills we are discussing here today honor those who gave so much to create a better America. In the process of pursuing truth, justice, and equality, much has been sacrificed, and for that we are forever grateful. So, Mr. Vella, in addition to the D.C. war memorials, the term war memorial as defined in Representative Stubbe's bill would likely include National Park Service units such as Gettysburg National Battlefield in Pennsylvania, Pearl Harbor National Memorial in Hawaii, and Perry's Victory and International Peace Memorial in the state of Ohio. What would such a broad definition of war memorials mean for the National Park Service's permitting process for veterans demonstrations and special events?
Thank you, Congressman, for that question. The current practice of the National Park Service is that we do not collect application fees for veterans demonstrations and special events. For the reasons that you cited, we honor the sacrifices that were made by the veterans and their families. So this is just a standard operating practice. I can tell you, having been a superintendent in 4 different parks, this is just not something that we do for the reasons that you've articulated, the value, the importance of those sacrifices, the stories that they contain. So the bill that's being suggested basically codifies our existing practices and protocols.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Mr. Fisher-Hughes, in your testimony, you stated that the Peter J. McGuire gravesite and memorial was entered in the National Register of Historic Places in 2018. In your opinion, what would designating this site as a National Historic Landmark provide that is not accomplished by inclusion on the National Register of Historic Places?
Well, it would assist in many ways in the commemoration of a man who, as I've said, has been called a forgotten giant. I think it's impossible to fully understand American history since the period of the Civil War without understanding the American labor movement as part of that history. And I feel that Mr. McGuire, as a figure who in the labor movement was less radical and more organizational, who emphasized unions and not political involvement, this kind of figure was much more seminal than many of the figures who are better known, more radical in the history of the labor movement. And I think that without giving proper due to figures such as him, who stands beside Samuel Gompers and others in the very earliest period of the modern labor movement, it is not possible to fully understand American history.
Thank you very much. And as a lifelong resident of Camden County in New Jersey, can you briefly summarize the local support for designating the Peter J. McGuire Memorial as a National Historic Landmark?
The support for that designation is very, very broad. As I mentioned, for one thing, for 113 years, there have been ceremonies that include always the local labor movement, the leaders, the membership, and also many local officials. Certainly Pennsauken Township itself and Camden County. Camden County was in large part behind the move to have the National Historic Registry nomination approved. And local business leaders. The Pennsauken-Mercerville Area Chamber of Commerce has been one of the largest movers of this movement also.
Thank you. And in his testimony, Deputy Director Vila described the administrative process that leads to a National Historic Landmark designation. Mr. Fisher-Hughes, are you aware of any efforts that have been undertaken to go through that process?
That I'm not fully briefed on. I know that I've focused myself in assisting with the research on the National Historic Register, but the discussion of a parallel course for the landmark designation was simultaneous, and I know that other people were following through with that. At this point, I am aware primarily of the legislation.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Tonko. The chair recognizes Mr. Curtis for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to direct the majority of my comments to Mayor Ellis, but before I do, Ms. Kinney, I must stop and acknowledge and recognize your testimony today. If you are a representative of those your age, this country's in great hands. Thank you for being and for your boldness in being here today. I don't know how long Ms. Norton plans to serve in Congress, but I would keep an eye on her if I were you. And you might find a lot of support here once she decides to retire.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here today. Mayor Ellis, thank you for your testimony. Thank you for traveling this long distance to be here with us today. In your testimony, you talked about the Red Cross. I'd like to just mention my experience. As I talked to the Red Cross, they explained their reason for leaving the scene is that more people came into their office offering home and lodging than came in looking for a home and lodging. Can you maybe share with me in the community what it is about your community that makes that part of their characteristic and what it's like to serve as a mayor of a community like that?
Yeah, thank you for the question, first of all, and the comments. It's a remarkable experience to serve in a community that considers not only the residents of our city as neighbors and friends, but also cities around us. And anytime anything happens in our community, the cities around us are responding with us side by side. We work so close together, and just that kind of camaraderie between all the residents and all of the cities that are around us just brings us together. So when this event occurred, it was immediately recognized that there was going to be needed significant help, not only in providing bedding and quarters for people to reside, but we have a lot of children and families, so they needed to have an awful lot of activities. We had people bring in animals and things for other kids to be able to go in and take their mind off of that devastation, because when you leave your home, those little kids, they are traumatized by that event. And the community it went far beyond what I could even imagine. The animals, for instance, people stepped up and offered their pastures for horses and their homes for the cats and the dogs and everything else that you don't think about when a fire is upon you. So it's amazing to serve in a community like that.
Right, and we should acknowledge your town is a town of about 2,000. This impacted tens of thousands, so neighboring communities. It wasn't just your town. You get to represent all of them here today, but I think our same feeling goes for the many towns and cities that surround you. I also would like to mention and make sure that it's acknowledged that the Forest Service has supported this bill, and I think that's important. Can you maybe comment on, assuming this legislation is successful and we were able to name that Miracle Mountain, what the designation would mean to your community?
Well, we're prepared to start with a very large celebration this summer. It will become part of our city celebration as Miracle Mountain. I would hope to name it the Miracle Mountain Celebration. There's a new elementary school that's proposed to be put into our city, and I'm going to work hard to have that, if this goes through, named Miracle Mountain Elementary as well. It means a lot to all of our citizenry. As I mentioned in my testimony, We now refer to it as Miracle Mountain. If you say Miracle Mountain, you know exactly what we're talking about. And so it's well received.
So in other words, you've got this figured out. The federal government just needs to catch up with you.
We just need that little bit of help.
Can my members who are here today assume that they would be invited to this Miracle Mountain celebration? And
We would love to have you there. We will make sure that you have a celebration of a lifetime.
because we know how to celebrate in Utah, don't we?
We do.
All right. Thank you very much. I yield my time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Curtis. Thank you, Mr. Ellis. The chair recognizes Mr. Soto.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I'd like to thank my colleagues, Congresswoman Demings and Murphy, for helping co-introduce the Pulse National Memorial Bill. In addition, for my colleague, Representative Gonzalez-Colon, for supporting this bipartisan legislation. Thank you to Director Vela for your position of no position. Just to address briefly the confusion and expectation that the site would have an affiliation with the federal government. I want to reassure my colleagues it's been thoroughly reported in our local press that this would be privately run. The One Pulse Foundation is amply funded and regularly receives input from survivors, bipartisan group of local officials and community stakeholders. There's actually, secondly, 10 examples already of national memorials that are not affiliated with our Park Service, from the National Memorial for Fallen Educators to the AIDS Memorial, Grove National Memorial, and the David Berger Memorial. So we've done this numerous times before, including in 2018 and 19. It's a truly national site. We have artifacts from most of the 50 states consisting of art, quilts, recognitions, photos, and other recognitions from across the nation. And we regularly have visitors from all over the nation and internationally, just to highlight how national this this traumatic event was. 3 years ago, we had KRQE News 13 in Santa Fe, New Mexico, report Monday night in Santa Fe, a vigil was held for the victims of the Orlando shooting. The event, called Santa Fe Stands with Orlando, was organized by Santa Fe's mayor and others. Hundreds filled the plaza to honor the victims. We similarly saw around that time the Deseret News in Utah mentioned several vigils, including in Salt Lake City, in Provo, in Draper, and in Ogden. So, and those are just two of the many states that really came together during this time to recognize this terrible tragedy. And it's also, in addition to being truly a national site, it's truly a memorial. It's remembering the 49 lost, the 53 injured, those we lost in the LGBTQ community and the Latinx community. So I appreciate the comments of both Director Vela, of Chair Holland, and of Ranking Member Curtis, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Soto. The chair recognizes Ms. Napolitano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For Ms. Cochran, I thank you for being here and for willing to speak on behalf of Representative Cole and myself, and also for former member David Dreyer, whose idea it is. He's the chair of the Tribune. And you emphasize in your statement the foundation's clear intention that it be completely funded by private donations. Can you discuss the foundation's capacity to fulfill the requirement, and what input and who will work towards development of the design?
Thank you, Congresswoman Napolitano, and thank you so much for your testimony and your kind introduction today. We have several approaches that we're taking to the question of funding. First of all, our plans are that the memorial should be relatively modest in size and design, and that we do not plan to have any names included, so there won't be any necessity of updating or changing the memorial once it's built. Secondly, because we have already garnered support from prominent people within the media world and the journalism community, we're very hopeful that we will be able to raise significant support. We're very grateful, as I said in my testimony, for the support already from the Annenberg Foundation and the Michael and Jackie Farrow Foundation. We also believe that we have the ability to raise small donations from individuals who are supportive of the cause. And in fact, just with our the announcement, even though we weren't asking necessarily for donations, we did receive some. And we think this is something that can be that will be supported by citizens as well as journalists, because citizens have a very strong interest in a free press.
Thank you. Well, then September 24th, you testified before the National Capital Memorial Advisory Commission, and they had some recommendations, clarifications. Could you address what they were?
Yes, they asked that we clarify that this was intended to be a commemoration of the U.S. commitment to a free press and not to individual journalists. And we do agree with that as the purpose of the memorial, and we're happy to work with the committee to make those necessary clarifications in the language.
Madam Chair, there are multiple letters of support from many of the groups that are behind this, and I read, I'm sure you've seen the list of the CBS News, the Capital Gazette, Annenberg Foundation, just an NBC, Wall Street Journal, many others supporting this, and I'm hopeful that this will go through the committee, and I'm hoping you'll schedule it soon, because it is a very worthwhile project, and I thank you very much for your presence. Do you have anything else to add?
Thank you. Not unless there are other questions.
Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ms. Napolitano. The chair recognizes Ms. Norton.
Yeah, and I thank the chair for accommodating me and my constituent, and I'd like to ask her a couple of questions. One, you are a Washingtonian. You're calling for a novel memorial here in the nation's capital. You know that the mall is closed. We have had to fight to make sure the mall did not become cluttered. Have you thought of a site for this memorial to the women who served in World War II on the home front and in the field?
Thank you for your question. Yes, I have considered many different locations, and the National Capital Planning Commission has been kind enough to give me a list of all of the potential sites that a memorial and monument could go, and I have complete faith that the National Capital Planning Commission and the National Park Service would be an excellent resource and give great ideas as to where it could go.
I appreciate that answer, because with many memorials now situated in the nation's capital, it's important to flesh out what is the best site for a memorial of this kind. Now, the question of raising funds, your memorial seemed fairly elaborate, and you have your own nonprofit. Have you considered both the difficulties and, for that matter, maybe the advantages, given the subject matter you will have in fundraising?
Yes, I have. I am of the mind that my design as it stands now is a little bit simple and would be easy to build, and this is a cause that I think would be rather easy to support, as everyone appreciates the women's efforts in the war. And we would look to garner support, as I said, from women's groups and organizations and companies that first employed the women during the war, and hopefully we'll be able to gain support from maybe a woman-run PR firm and gain funds from that.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Norton. I'd like to start out, thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you for taking your time to enlighten us, and we all appreciate the effort you made to be here. Ms. Kenny, I just want to start by thanking you for being here today. Starting this idea in 5th grade, that's amazing, and I have to say that I'm sure I can speak for everyone here. We're very proud of you. So thank you so much for all the effort that you have gone through to see your project to this point. It takes a lot of courage, and I recognize that. Acting Director Vela, my first question is for you. Given the fact that the largest clustering of National Park Service war memorials is right here in Washington, D.C., does the NPS have a typical protocol for permitting and charging fees to veterans? I think you've pretty much answered this. For events at D.C. war memorials, for example, at the World War II, Korean, and Vietnam War memorials?
So we do not, as I mentioned earlier, Madam Chairwoman, collect application fees for demonstrations and special events. But what we would like to do is to work with the sponsor and the committee to make sure that we clarify the scope of the legislation and be happy to work with the committee on those interests.
And when the NPS does issue a permit for honor flights and other veteran events at D.C. war memorials, what support do the veterans receive from the National Park Service and the U.S. Park Police?
Being my 3rd month on the job as exercising the authority of the director, I'm becoming more and more familiar with how these processes work on the National Mall. But when we go through I'm just using my own memory, having approved permits as a superintendent, that there is quite a bit of dialogue to make sure that we understand the intent and purpose. We have areas designated for First Amendment. We respect that, we honor that. But anything that goes beyond that, we do spend a lot of time and energy to make sure that we understand the purpose, the cause, and also any unanticipated consequences as we go through the permit process. This would be just standard, no matter who the group would be. But clearly there is that additional sensitivity to our veterans groups as we go through those processes, not only here in the nation's capital, but frankly around the country.
Thank you so much. And Acting Director Vela, since I have you here, I felt compelled to ask you about another issue, so I appreciate if you can answer. A couple of weeks ago, media reports detailed the deployment of National Park Service personnel to the nation's southern border to enforce immigration law. Nearly every time the National Park Service has provided testimony before the Natural Resources Committee this Congress, you highlighted your agency's deferred maintenance backlog, noting that it is NPS's main funding priority. How does sending NPS staff to the border, paying for them to remain there, and temporarily diverting them from their role of resource protection fit in with that prioritization of the funding backlog? And if you could just kind of speak to that issue, I think that it concerns all of us.
I appreciate the question, ma'am, and thank you for that opportunity. Having been a border park superintendent on the Texas-Mexican border, this is something that the National Park Service has been engaged in providing support for our law enforcement rangers for many years, for as long as I can remember. Clearly, the President has some very specific interests and objectives on the border that we are doing our best to satisfy current day. But it's been my experience over the years where we've provided that support. And for example, Madam Chairwoman, when we may have a number of vacancies that may exist on the law enforcement side, and having been a former law enforcement ranger, that we will bring folks coming on an acting basis to help provide support, to help those parks achieve their operational missions. So this is a little bit more defined, it's a little bit more focused, but in my history in the National Park Service, this is something that we have done from time to time based on certain missions and certain causes.
Okay. And it's my understanding that since the DOI started this initiative as a pilot program last May, The department has more than doubled the number of law enforcement officers assigned to assist U.S. Border Patrol, which means significantly more staff and resources are being diverted out of our parks and to the border. Is that correct?
I haven't been briefed on the current call as to what is being required and requested. It is a briefing that I will be receiving soon. But what we want to do is to make sure that whatever our mission is, our first priority is the protection of those involved in performing the mission. In this case, our law enforcement rangers, the communities that we serve in the park, and the visitors. And so that's our focus, no matter what the call is, to make sure that, that we achieve those interests. And based upon the mission, we'll determine the number of assets that we will need. Madam Chairwoman, the other thing that I'm aware of is that these deployments are short-term for a specific period of time. And I think that we're learning about who we need to deploy, how long, the skill sets that are required. So I hope to have answers to those questions myself in the near future based upon the mission and the purpose for the call-out.
Thank you. And
Yes,
thank
ma'am.
you to my colleagues for allowing me to go over time. I thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to these in writing. Under Committee Rule 3.0, members of the committee must submit witness questions within 3 business days following the hearing, and the hearing record will be open for 10 business days for these responses. If there is no further business, without objection, this committee stands adjourned.
Language.